why the Rams may have found their next star running back in the third round in Blake Corum, and more big questions that need to be answered about the 2024 Rams. That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Ramily, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rams, your daily podcast covering your Los Angeles Rams, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're also available over on YouTube, so if you haven't yet, do us a huge favor and subscribe to the Locked On Rams YouTube channel, the fastest growing Rams YouTube channel in the game, trying to get a 14K before training camp. So hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit the like button, and also how big of an impact do you expect Blake Corum to have in year one for the Rams? My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMac_LA. I've been covering LA sports for over a decade. Bleacher Report 24/7, Dodgers Nation, now the Rams 4 Locked On. And as always, I'm joined by the Rams pre-half and post-game show host for the Rams flagship radio station, ESPN 710 LA. He's entering his 9th season covering your Los Angeles Rams, the people's champ, Mr. Travis Rogers. You can follow him on X at Travis Rogers. And on today's show, we're talking all about the running back position. Big questions about the RBs. And Todd Gurley had some very interesting comments about the Rams. That's coming up. But first, a reminder that today's episode of Locked On Rams is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Okay, Travis, so we're continuing our series on the big questions for the 2024 Rams, and today we're focusing on the run game. And I think the big question for the offense is how much of a commitment is Sean McVay going to make for this Rams running game? And we saw the reinforcements in the offseason. You bring in Jonah Jackson. You re-sign Kevin Dotson. You move Steve Avila to the center position. And also, you pick up Blake Corum in the third round. And I kind of want to debunk a little myth here. And everyone always screams at the television, run the ball, run the ball. And yes, there are certain situations where the Rams don't run the ball enough. I'm looking at you, Baltimore Ravens game. I'm looking at you, 3 trips to the red zone in the wild card game against the Lions. But last season, the Rams, they're 50% of the time they were past the football. That was in the bottom 10. And then 41% of the time, that was 8th for how much they ran the football. So the statistics actually say that Sean McVay has done a better job at committing to the run. It's just in the certain situations, I think that's when it's magnified.
Yeah, I think that he's willing to run the ball, except for when you absolutely feel like you have to run the ball. Like the 2 examples that you used, D-Mac, I think are the perfect ones. You know, the Ravens game where they're inside the 10-yard line. It feels like they're getting ready to go in. They're getting ready to take control of the game, and they go to the air. You go back to that wild card game where they were able to move the ball and get down inside the high red area, as Sean McVay likes to call it. And all of a sudden, they stop running the ball. They will run it between the 20s. It just seems like once they get inside that 20-yard line, they really, really are inclined to throw the ball along the way. But for all the reasons that you mentioned, whether you're talking about the offensive line being upgraded, them paying some guys along the way, a little bit of the shuffling of the interior line, the draft pick that they used on Blake Corum. This is clearly something that they're committed to moving forward. And I hope, and I'm optimistic, and look, the first option is always to let Matthew Stafford make a play. He's your best player on offense, but hopefully very shortly after that, knowing that you have a couple of really good options in the backfield, that the Rams do lean on that a little bit more inside that 10-yard line.
Absolutely, and that's really what had fans screaming in the wild card game, because you ran 3 times in those 3 red zone trips. In the Ravens game, you get down the field in 9 straight running plays, and then you throw the ball 3 times. So I think it's the placement and knowing when to run, and that's why you have to feel better about the current personnel. Because really, I think the best coaches, I mean, look at Belichick and all the success he had, is you tailor your offense based on the personnel that you have. And you look at Kyren Williams. I mean, the breakout season he had was unbelievable. I mean, over 95 rushing yards per game. But really what impressed me most about Kyren Williams last season was he averaged 95.3 yards per game, And that was great, but 38.25 yards after contact. That led the NFL. So you got someone that can break tackles, get yards after contact, and then you bring in someone like Blake Corum, who is an absolute red zone threat that was one of the best in college football last season, has been for a good amount of time. And I think you look at this offense too, and I think early on the season, it's looking at that goal line. I mean, just looking how they can manipulate defenses at the goal line with Matthew Stafford and just with that ferocious offensive line in the middle. And I think that's what's going to make this team a top 5 offense. I truly do.
I think that they have the makings of a team that's going to be able to move the ball in a lot of different ways. It's weird how all of this stuff kind of fits together along the way, because not only are you having 2 running backs that you can lean on heavily, I think a lot of it's going to have to do with how effective Puka is, how effective Cooper Kupp is, that if they're having big years, that opens things up for the running game. If Puka backslides a little bit, if Cooper Kupp has another year that's a little bit up and down, that's going to put more pressure on that running game, that they're not going to be able to get those lighter boxes like we've seen a handful of times before, because Puka and Cooper Kupp have been as good as they are. If all of a sudden those guys are not having big years, if Matthew Stafford is not lighting up, and again, I expect that they will, because they're just really good players across the board, but one hand certainly feeds the other. I think they're going to be great. We've talked about this a lot. We know I talked about the wide receiver group. We're talking about the running back group right now. The only part of the offensive package that really is a little bit of a question mark at this point is the tight ends, and you get that going, the other 2 phases certainly start to get going as well. But I'm very bullish on the run game. I think that, like you mentioned right off the top, that the money, both metaphorical and literal, that they've spent to rebuild that offensive line leads me to believe that they're going to commit to a running game in a way that maybe we haven't seen since Todd Gurley.
No doubt about it. And I think that with that in mind, you want to see at the very minimum 30 rush attempts per game, because like you always say, don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. What they did was they signed blockers, and that's what they did in free agency. Jackson, Dotson, Parkinson. I mean, those names tell you all you need to know about the scheme they want to run. And then also you look at the fact that Matthew Stafford has to commit to it as well. I mean, I think that kind of going back watching that Ravens game, I'm not so sure he didn't check out of those plays that were possibly running plays and maybe try to throw it in the air. And I think that's kind of the big difference there is it's not how many times you run, it's when you run. I mean, if you're Rams fans, how many times have you yelled at your TV, run the football when it's 1st and 5 inside the 10, when it's 2nd and 5 inside the 10, and then you see multiple wideout sets. And I think there's a theory too. You mentioned the tight ends. I think that one of the reasons why Sean McVay wanted to draft Bowers was so they could have more 12 personnel and have a bigger interior offensive line presence and find those mismatches in the pass game. So I definitely think that you're going to see a big switch up this year with the Rams offense.
Yeah, I like what you said, that it's not just necessarily the amount of runs that you have, right? It's not if you get to 25 runs, everything works out, or 30 or 32 or whatever the magic number may be. I think what it is are they effective? Do you make the defense play both sides of the ball? Do you make them stop that run game first? That opens it up for Matthew Stafford. And most importantly, inside the 10-yard line, do you make them defend that? Because it almost goes without saying, especially on first down. If they'll run the ball on first down, we've seen it time and time again. If it doesn't work, then you can almost bet your house on it that 2nd and 3rd down are going to be passing plays. Sometimes you're going to have to commit to it to a degree that maybe is a little unorthodox for a coach like Sean McVay. I would really like to see it. Like I've said, you just said it to me. I'll believe it when I see it. I'm going to go by what they do, not by what they say. And I've just seen Sean McVay put the ball in the air in those situations way more frequently than he commits to that running game. Maybe this year will be different, but I am a little skeptical. He loves to throw the ball.
He does love to throw the football, but I also think that this team has really made us change as far as their approach. And it's almost they're zigging while other teams are zagging because it's such a pass-happy league. And, hey, look, Aaron Donald's gone, right? The most effective defense is a well-rested defense. And you pound the ball and you pound that rock and you take time off the clock. And that's kind of a great way to continue to have a thriving defense. So I definitely think that's also part of their plan as well. But we're going to continue this discussion on the running game. We're going to talk more about rookie Blake Corum, Kyren Williams, How much of a 1-2 punch is it? How much of a thunder and lightning are we going to see? Or is it more like a thunder and thunder, really, with these two? But that's coming up next here on Locked On Rams. This segment of Locked On Rams is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. And I think we all know this, right? Sometimes you just need the opportunity to get things off your chest and just get it out there. Big or small, certain things can start to get to you a little bit. It's important to let that out, especially to someone that's unbiased in your life. So today I want to tell you how I feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. You can have a lot of different things that you want to get off your chest, and therapy can really help. And it can be different for everyone. Most of us have much bigger problems in our life. Just talking about it helps. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible. It's designed to be suited for your schedule. If you have a therapist that you don't exactly connect with on the first try, of course you can switch it for no fees. So visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. And we are off and running here on Locked On Rams. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also want to send a special shout out to those everyday listeners out there watching and listening to every single episode of Locked On Rams. And you can be an everyday listener too. Membership is 100% free. We're doing a little pre-training camp discount right now, 100% free for those new members. All you got to do is watch and listen to every single episode, and you won't miss a thing about your Los Angeles Rams. All right, Travis, here in our second segment, going to pick up the conversation on the running backs because Blake Corum, I really, truly believe, could go down as one of the best draft picks of the 2024 NFL draft, especially when you put him into this offense that he's tailor-made for. If you look at what he did at Michigan, the success he had was unbelievable. I mean, you look at the production, all 4 years at Michigan, really could go down as pretty much the best running back in school history, but they get him in the third round with the 83rd overall pick, and it's the fact that the Rams last year, they go to the man blocking. They go to the duo concepts, the gap scheme. That is what he did at Michigan. No running back at the college ranks did that more than Blake Corum. So that's why it's a perfect fit for him and the Rams.
Yeah, I think that schematically it fits incredibly well. I think the part that with Corum that I'm most interested in, and I think it's going to determine how we kind of view his draft pick in this first season, is how much he actually gets to play, right? And I mean that in both the good and the bad way, that if he's playing a lot, that probably means something happened to Kyren Williams. If he plays not at all, that probably means that he's not quite ready to step into that NFL heat the way that we're hoping that he would be. It's a little bit of a fine line, a little bit of a needle to thread between spelling Kyren just enough, but having Kyren get the lion's share of it. I like what you said in the tease there. This is more of a thunder and thunder sort of thing. This is not where you have two different styles of backs. These are very similar styles of backs. I think that you are going to use him in a perfect world. Kyren Williams stays healthy and Blake Corum's getting maybe 8 touches a game. I think that would be a perfect scenario. And maybe somebody like Williams is getting, 20 or 22, something like that. That adds up to about that 30 number that we're looking for. And I would be okay with it being passes and runs along the way. But if he's playing a lot, I don't know if I love that. Rookies, always a little bit dicey, at the running back position, maybe a little bit less so along the way. But the one thing we've talked about with Kyren Williams so many times is whether or not he's able to stay on the field. And if we're getting a ton of Corum, I think that means that something happened to Kyren, and that's not good news.
Nancy, we should have a little siren here because we agree a lot on the show. This one, fire up the disagreement siren here because I actually disagree with that. I actually think we want to see a little more of Blake Corum because of your point about how important Kyren Williams is to this team. Because we saw last season, this team was down the dumps. This team was headed for an under 500 season, and then Kyren Williams comes back off the IR and rushes for 688 yards and 6 touchdowns in his final 6 games of the regular season. And that, along with the play of Matthew Stafford and other guys just stepping up, that really propelled them to a 10-win season and a wild card round appearance when no one thought they were going to do that before the season. And then you look at the regular season totals. I mean, more rush yards per game than any running back in the NFL. All those numbers are great, but this is for an injury-prone player. So I think the more you see Blake Corum, kind of the less chances that Kyren Williams is going to wear down through the course of the season and that he gets to peak when it matters most in the playoffs. And I just think that this Rams team and Sean McVay and Mike LaFleur, they really unlock something. I mean, think about this. Look at the timeline. You go from a zone blocking scheme to one where there's more man-on-man blocking schemes. You do that, and then you end up with the best running attack, one of the best running attacks in all the National Football League, and then you add a running back that perfectly fits that scheme. I mean, all the signs here point to the Rams going heavy on the run. And with Blake Corum, I mean, these are gaudy numbers. I mean, 27 touchdowns in the red zone. I mean, for his career, 4 seasons, 3,737 yards and 58 touchdowns on 675 carries. When you get guys that put up those numbers, it's like, doesn't matter if they're playing Pop Warner, where, by the way, Blake Corum, when he was really, really young, he played for the Rams. I know you saw that picture of him. He was destined for the Horns. But high school, college, when they put up numbers, it's like all these guys know how to do is be productive when you've done it at that level for so long.
I love that. I agree with that. I think that when winning is a habit, right? If you get used to winning, that's nothing but good news. I think one of the reasons that I don't want to say keep him off the field. That feels a little aggressive, but I think one of the things that needs to be factored into how frequently he's going to play is how does he do in pass protection? And this is a big part of it because like we were talking about in that first segment, D-Mac, that Sean McVay wants to throw the ball first. He wants to throw the ball second. And what that means is you need to give Matthew Stafford a little time, and you certainly need to protect him. We've seen what it looks like when the Rams don't have their starting quarterback. We talked about Jimmy G last week. The everydays will remember that. I'm really big on Jimmy G if he's got to play a little bit. But the last thing you have to do is play with your backup quarterback. So pass protection, I think when we're talking about the running back position, is probably the number one priority, or at least even to production on the ground itself. Rookies tend to struggle with that, first and foremost, like the running the ball, getting in the end zone, getting your own, feeding yourself first. Sure. Like you said, that's something they've been doing for a very long time at a variety of different levels. But the NFL is very complicated. The NFL puts a lot of pressure on guys, and defensive coordinators are really good at finding the weak link in something. And if that's the pass pro and the running backs, they're going to attack that. We know that Kyren Williams can carry that load. We know that that's something that he was able to do pretty well. We'll see with Blake Corum. I think that's one of the things you want to look at in training camp. That's something you want to look at during the exhibition season, is how well does he protect Matthew Stafford?
There's no doubt about that. It's pretty simple to me. Can't block, can't play, right? I mean, if you can't block, if you can't protect the biggest investment, the most important person on this team, Matthew Stafford, then you can't see the field. But I think the makeup of Blake Corum, he played under Jim Harbaugh, right? I mean, they don't mess around at Michigan. They won a national championship for a reason. And then you mentioned, too, the fact that, yeah, that's the priority. But also, you mentioned the injuries, right? I mean, what happened after Ronnie Rivers went down in week 6? Royce Freeman, Myles Gaskin, Darrell Henderson Jr., they brought him back off the couch. None of those guys are really able to do very much for this team. So this team really saw the impact of not having that running game. So, look, I think that's going to be one of the true, really, identities of this team is like, wow, Sean McVay is different, man. Mike LaFleur has really changed, and the personnel has definitely made Sean McVay look at the way he runs an offense in the NFL different in 2024. And I think that's kind of part of his evolution. I mean, all the great coaches, they evolve, right? I mean, the early West Coast offense with Bill Walsh, that was pound the rock. And then it changed under Seifert. It was more passing with the wideouts. I mean, some offenses just change a little bit and they tweak along the way.
They do, and you're right. And it's that evolve or die thing, right? And I believe that's mostly true, but I also think that the really good guys know what they're good at, and they go back to their strengths, and they continue to do what they do well. And for Sean McVay, that's throw the ball. For Matthew Stafford, that's throw the ball. That when things get tight, when things get close, go to your strengths. That's always going to be for those guys to put the ball up in the air. I think you're right. I think that's one of those. Ideally and stylistically and schematically, we'd like to do a little bit more of this. But when you start to play for real, when we're done with those 3 preseason games and they're in Detroit for opening night, it's going to be, we got to get that ball in that end zone. We got to find a way to move the ball right now, and more often than not, those 2 guys are going to want to put it up in the air.
Totally agree. They absolutely will. And like I said, when you have one of the best arms, you're going to use it. I think we will see some bounce. But coming up next, Todd Gurley had some interesting comments about the Rams and the Super Bowl in 2021. That's coming up next here on Locked On Rams. So if you're like me, you love tons of different sports. Now, football is by far number one, but maybe you like basketball. Maybe you like baseball, hockey, MMA, boxing, golf, tennis. Well, I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can bet on the Dodgers. You can bet on the Angels. You can bet on your Los Angeles Rams, who are currently a plus 3,000 to win Super Bowl 59. They're a plus 330 to win the NFC West. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And welcome back to Locked On Rams. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay, Travis, so I always get nostalgic. I always get a little emotional talking about the Todd father, Mr. Todd Gurley. Really one of the big reasons why I fell in love with the Rams when they returned to Los Angeles. And he had some really cool comments he said recently on a show he was on. And I didn't know this. Did you know this? That Gurley went to the Super Bowl 56 in 2021. And he said that he was happy for the Rams that they won the Super Bowl in 2021. And he even went to the game. He stayed at the stadium after the game. He watched the players celebrate with their families, but that was fun on the field too. And he said, I was happy for the organization and the trainers and my old teammates and stuff like that. I knew they were going to win one with the moves they were making. I mean, this is like a guy that it's like some guy that went to his old girlfriend's wedding and is like happy for them. It's like, oh, I love you too. You know, it's just like, I don't know. This just hurts me a little bit. Just thinking of him there, watching them celebrate, knowing that if Todd Gurley doesn't injure his knee, I will die on this hill. Todd Gurley doesn't injure his knee. The Rams win multiple Super Bowls. He goes to the Hall of Fame, and they probably don't trade Jared Goff.
It's certainly a good theory. You don't have to sell me too hard on it. Look, what I take away from this is that Todd Gurley is a mature, functioning adult. To be able to see someone else have the success that he wanted and be happy for that other person. Because to your point, D-Mac, if I was on that team, if I was making the money, if I was the one that was the centerpiece of that offense when the first time Sean McVay showed up, I was the engine that made this thing go. And it didn't happen when I was there and happened shortly after I left.
And it looks like Travis got disconnected. But yeah, anytime you look back at Todd Gurley's career with the Rams, the highs were so high, but then all of a sudden the knee injuries took their toll and really robbed him of what would have been a Hall of Fame career. And I know people say, oh, the contract, the $57 million contract over 4 years, that was a bad deal. But no, he earned that contract. And it really was a tragedy what happened to Gurley. And yes, I get it. Over $49 million in career earnings. You can't call that a tragedy. He's well compensated, but this is someone who truly was on pace to go down as a top 10 running back in NFL history, a dynamic back, and it's just really sad to see, but good to see that he had the support of his teammates and he was there. And I think a lot of players wouldn't be doing that. I think a lot of players would really let that kind of take them and distance them from their former team, but he embraced it. He showed his support and really kind of shows the kind of class act that Todd Gurley is. And I think him and Steven Jackson too. Steven Jackson, he played with some of the worst Rams teams, just going up against stacked boxes every single week. So sometimes these running backs can have some bad luck. Of course, you got the Marshall Faulks of the world. They had a fantastic career, but hopefully, Kyren Williams and Blake Corum can continue to add to this legacy of elite running backs in Rams history, the Eric Dickersons of the world. So, yeah, Todd Gurley, he's kind of one of those guys that once a Ram, always a Ram. He's always got his lifetime Rams membership card. And I hope that long after his career's over, which we're kind of already in the process of, that he'll continue to show his face at Rams camp or Rams training camp and be at Rams games, because when they show him on that big jumbo screen at SoFi Stadium on the halo there, they're going to go nuts for Todd Gurley. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Rams. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. And until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.